Good day, Suidlanders, and welcome to Suidlanders Week in Review for Friday, the 22nd of November, 2024. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for the quality of last week's effort. Somebody whom I know very well and of whom I have a very high opinion told me that it was bad. And I'm not sure why. It could have been that I had a bit of a cold from 2 days of icy rain. It could have been that I was just a bit exhausted. Or it could have been, I recall that the hotel where I'm recording using Wi Fi at the moment was quite busy last Friday. And it might have been that I was restraining myself a little bit so that I didn't bellow uh, throughout the place, as I usually do, but with more people to hear it than usual. I don't know. In any case, hopefully this week's Week in Review will be better. I'd like to thank my friend from China who has given two terrific compliments. I think that the least that I can do is record my thanks for those very, very exceptionally generous words. As usual, we begin with gold and silver. There's not too much to tell. Both of them have dropped roughly 10%, but I don't think that it means very much at the moment. I think that the market is going through a number of dynamic movements related to elections, related to exchange rates, related to events in the Middle East, related to potential currency adoptions, all sorts of complicated technical stuff. And I think we'll only know if there was meaning with hindsight. Beyond that, ladies and gentlemen, quite frankly, there is nothing else worth discussing this week than the deliberate steps being taken by the Western ruling class to cause, it is clear now, to cause World War III. As you may recall, in 2020, it was revealed that Russia had recently adjusted its policy on the use of nuclear weapons, but nobody was terribly sure what were the details at the time. Then, about 2 months ago, the legal documents describing the changes saw the light of day, and we learned that there were 3 amendments to Russia's long-standing no first strike policy. It was supposedly safeguarded by the giant, the enormous Voronezh M radars that cover every inch of Russia's borders, meaning that they supposedly or allegedly believed that they didn't have to wrestle with the intractable moral dilemma of when to hit first with nuclear weapons, because they would see an enemy's nuclear missiles coming from a long way away, so they could simply retaliate once they saw them coming in, throwing everything but the kitchen sink at their enemy, thus ensuring that in all probability the enemy would be destroyed, whereas Russia, stretched as it is over 11 time zones, may suffer greatly but would probably not be exterminated. That attitude was reinforced by Russia's possession of the most nuclear weapons, plus the largest nuclear warheads, plus the most advanced, speediest, and elusive nuclear missiles. Last but not least, Russia's complacent, if you like, attitude to the difficult conundrum of a nuclear first strike has for many years been buttressed by the knowledge that their historical focus on air defense missiles meant that they were streets ahead of everybody else. Therefore, fewer incoming enemy nuclear missiles, airplanes, or drones would get through than, proportionately, theirs by contrast. As an aside, we've recently seen that last point proven in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Yemen, and Iran beyond a doubt. There are now hundreds of examples to settle the argument. American air defense systems do work, but their kill ratio is poor. Russian systems are not perfect, but they are very good. Then, earlier this year, a NATO party struck 2 Voronezh M's. Depending upon how you count them, because there are radars that perform part of that work, part of that total coverage of Russia's borders that are not precisely the same as the others, between 6 and 13 of them, struck 2 of the Voronezh M's with 2 drones, blinding those 2 Voronezh M radars. And we know it was a NATO party by, for instance, the specifications of the vehicles. Ukraine, for instance, not being in physical possession of a vehicle that could fly so far, and even if they were, would not be legally able to obtain the necessary launch codes from the Pentagon. And even if they did, they don't possess people trained for years in such long-range NATO drones operation. And even if they had, they most certainly don't own the integral satellite-based targeting systems. It was a NATO event. End of story. That changed everything. As of that moment, Russia was slightly less invulnerable. Then the Western mainstream media and Volodymyr Zelensky suddenly began to clamor about Ukraine being permitted to use NATO long-range cruise missiles to strike targets deep inside Russia, which, by the way, actually NATO, and not Ukraine, had already done in the past, striking Tu-95 Bears, strategic nuclear bombers, at Friedrich Engels Air Force Base, and almost striking one of the cathedral domes of the Moscow Kremlin before being shot down. That prompted Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin to very candidly state that it would cause Russia to be at war with the NATO country in question. That is to say, the NATO country that provided the long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine, which indeed would be the country that operated them, not Ukraine, because only NATO countries could operate those long-range cruise missile systems. Then, a short while later, as already described to you, the 2020 nuclear first strike policy saw the light of day properly, and it enumerated 3 salient amendments. 1. Any strike of any sort on Russian soil by any country which is operating in league with a nuclear power shall entitle Russia to nuke both of those parties. As an aside, I remind you that Article 5 of the NATO Foundational Treaty document states that if any one NATO member state is attacked, all NATO member countries are expected to assist in its defense. Therefore, point 1 above could, in the fullness of time, come to mean that Russia believes itself entitled to nuke most of North America, Western Europe, Central Europe, and much of Eastern Europe, that is to say, all the NATO member countries in league with one another in terms of Article 5, all at once. Any large-scale attack, say a simultaneous swarm of 44 drones or whatever, on Russian soil would earn nuclear retaliation. Again, as an aside, I hasten to remind you that the 2 Voronezh M radars that were struck are the 2 that face southwest, south-southwest to south of Russia. And it is believed by the Russians that the USA's massive naval fleets gathered around Israel in the eastern Mediterranean, south-southwest of Russia, and in the northwestern Indian Ocean, south of Russia, are there, in their minds, for 2 purposes. 1, to aid and abet Israel, and number 2, to enable a massive swarm attack on Russia from the direction in which its incoming threat radar system is now blinded. 3. The same applies. So numbers 1 and 2 apply if perpetrated upon Belarus, White Russia, Russia's famous hand-in-glove ally. Lo and behold, a fortnight later, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, flew to Washington to ask the White House for permission to pretend to give Ukraine permission to use UK Storm Shadow missiles on Russian soil. He was told, and we know now that this is true, perhaps not in these words, but certainly to this exact effect. Wait until after our USA election. Otherwise, Kamala Harris is bound to lose if we are perceived to have started World War III. Then, on Monday last, it was reported that Joe Biden informed Volodymyr Zelensky that he may proceed, meaning, actually, we are about to proceed. Then, on Tuesday night, the USA fired 6 long-range ATACMS missiles into Russia, of which 5 were shot down at great height and did nothing, and 1 was shot down at close proximity, and its flaming wreck caused a small fire at an arsenal. Then on Wednesday night, the UK fired approximately 12 Storm Shadow missiles at Russia, and the best intelligence we have suggests that the targets were not destroyed. However, some people were killed. Then, on Thursday morning, a NATO country, going by the distances that had to have been flown, attacked Russia with a drone swarm of no less than 44 vehicles. To the best of our knowledge, the attack was by and large thwarted by Russia's air defense systems. In any case, no evidence has been offered for any great success. Satellite imagery, for example. Then, at some point in recent days, a secret delegation from the USA visited the Russian embassy in Washington to inquire how serious is Russia's retaliation going to be, and they were told by Ambassador Anatoly Antonov, "The Kremlin assures me that what is coming is very serious and that it shall involve the USA." The USA promptly shut its embassy in Kyiv yesterday. Now, as far as events this week go, Russia has been targeting NATO soldiers in Ukraine very, very heavily. Many hundreds may already have died. What's more, we are starting to see video of a Russian missile attack, apparently upon a Ukrainian rocket and missile factory originating in Soviet times. The videos clearly show well over 20 independent warheads streaking in from the air, and just a few minutes ago, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin gave an address to the West from his iconic wood-paneled office in the Kremlin, stating that the missile used was called Orezhnik, meaning hazelwood in English, and in Russian it is a colloquial reference to a kiri, a cudgel or a short club, and that it was an intermediate-range ballistic missile fitted with non-nuclear warhead or heads, flying at Mach 10 or 10 times the speed of sound, which, as you will recall from Standard 7 General Science, is in the air, as opposed to through water, 332 meters a second at sea level at 20 degrees Celsius, which means that the missile was traveling at 11,952 kilometers an hour. However, what we have learned from what initially appeared to be poor grammar on Putin's part, plus Ukrainian sources, plus historical Western knowledge of Soviet and Russian missile development, is the missile had 6 warheads, each of which possessed 6 sub-warheads. and that all of those too were hypersonic. The world has been awestruck by the sheer idea of this hitherto unknown weapon, which is, by definition, nowhere near Russia's most devastating. In response, a senior British general has astonishingly announced just a short while ago that the British military is ready to go to war against Russia at once, to deploy immediately. Even more insanely, yesterday, USA time, a certain Rear Admiral Buchanan of the USA Strategic, meaning nuclear in this case, Command, declared the USA is prepared to engage in a nuclear exchange with Russia that we believe we can win without using our entire arsenal, thus retaining sufficient arsenal to deter the rest of the world's nuclear powers from any other actions. Again, as an aside, you may care to be reminded that the known nuclear powers of the world are the USA, Russia, UK, France, China, Israel, Pakistan, and India. North Korea certainly possesses its own and Russian Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles, but it is not yet known for certain whether Russia gave them nuclear warheads for those missiles. Iran has ICBMs and many, many cruise missiles. We saw them used very, very, very effectively against Israel 7 weeks ago, but nobody really knows if they possess nuclear warheads. For reasons I may not share here and now, I, personally, am 100% certain that they either already have or are about to have nuclear warheads, for whatever that is worth. Anyway, in concluding his short speech, Vladimir Putin warned bluntly and unequivocally that each further provocation shall earn immediate retaliation. And his turn of phrase has left Western experts concluding that he implied retaliation on Western soil. Again, there's either some error or ambiguity in the grammar that he used or that the interpreters are using. And so it is, my beloved Suidlanders, brethren, that two interrelated, pedophiliac, satanic death cult cabals are dragging all of humanity to death via a terminal conflict between the West and the rest of the world. And we have very, very little say in what they are doing in our name to poke this bear. It is clear now that those two interrelated death cult cabals have succeeded in completely penetrating and possessing like demons the West and instigating it to provoke Russia and its global alliance beyond the point of no return, given that the provocations are clearly not going to be ended. On that note, the Western media is now, all of a sudden, continuously alluding to Ukraine's own ability to produce nuclear weapons, following Volodymyr Zelensky's mention of that last week. Clearly, there is inadequate cause and substance for the media to suddenly make this subject ostensibly very newsworthy. On the face of it, it's nonsense. The Ukraine producing nuclear weapons in a matter of weeks, as he put it, out of the blue like that. With whose help? However, they seem to think that it's worth chanting this story over and over. And I put it to you, people in Christ Jesus, that they are preparing a fable to enchant us when some sort of atomic or nuclear event becomes the next provocation of Russia. Last, but still very interesting, my China friend tells me that all of a sudden, newspapers, public signboards, TV, radio, social media, and other internet resources in China are featuring government notices to people to beware of spies and foreign agents. They know something. They know something. That's all for today. May our Lord bless and keep you and yours and strengthen you for the times that lie ahead of us, but now not very far ahead.